Will the laws passed this week help facilitate a respectful debate? Or will they in fact silence some voices out of fear they might end up on the wrong side of the law? In a rare display of cross-chamber cooperation between the government and the opposition, Federal Parliament this week passed laws intended to govern the conduct of the Marriage Postal Survey. The only reason we're having a Marriage Postal Survey is that the opposition refused to support a compulsory attendance plebiscite. Had there been such a plebiscite, the usual Australian Electoral Commission guidelines would have applied. So we can really say that the opposition has this week cooperated on legislation that would not have been necessary, except that they blocked the compulsory attendance plebiscite. The question I have is this: will the laws passed this week help facilitate a respectful debate? Or will they in fact silence some voices out of fear they might end up on the wrong side of the law? Most Australians are familiar with the concept of electoral material being authorised. It therefore comes as no surprise that the laws passed this week provide for some element of authorisation. However, in the circumstances that the Marriage Postal Survey is not about electing people to Parliament, but rather about the exchange of views on a proposal to radically alter both our understanding and our practice of marriage, there are some complexities. For example, any individual who expresses views on same-sex marriage over the next couple of months may need to authorise those views, since the definition of what needs to be authorised is very broad. It will be interesting in particular to see how this plays out in the realm of blogs and on Facebook. Now, as you might imagine, there are some exceptions, but listen to this. Whilst there is an explicit exception for communications for genuine satirical or artistic purposes, there is no explicit exception for communications with a religious purpose. The law also says that a person is not to vilify, intimidate, or threaten to cause harm to another person on the basis of that other person's views on the matter, or because of their religious convictions, sexual orientation, gender identity, or intersex status. Now, while I hope that this debate can be conducted respectfully, that would be wonderful, the difficulty with all legislation of this type does not lie in the core behaviour which is forbidden, but rather it lies in the uncertainty created around the edges and also doubts as to how the courts might interpret the legislation. Even though, as something of a safeguard, no action alleging vilification can be commenced without the consent of the Commonwealth Attorney-General, it will be interesting to see the basis on which he either gives or refuses that consent. In any case, regardless of that safeguard, I expect this legislation, as with all anti-vilification legislation, will have some negative impact on the willingness of people to freely express their views. The legislation also forbids the distribution of misleading or deceptive material. However, at least one legal expert opinion I have seen believes this is drafted narrowly so as to deal with misleading or deceptive material about the voting process itself, rather than about misleading or deceptive material on matters of substance. We can therefore expect to continue hearing from advocates of change that there are no consequences and that we do not need to concern ourselves with what might happen after the wedding, despite all the evidence from countries that have already gone down this path. Based on all that has happened over the last few weeks, even on what this week's legislation covers and does not cover, what it excludes and does not exclude, I remain convinced that we should all be very concerned about what lies ahead for Australia if marriage is redefined.